Racist cop confronts black woman at the terminal unaware her shadow escort waits to seize his forged IDs. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. It was a busy morning at the airport terminal, the usual chaos of people rushing to catch flights, and the air was filled with the sounds of rolling suitcases and announcements overhead. The bustling crowd moved in every direction, unaware of the tense encounter about to unfold. Jasmine Carter stood near her gate, checking her phone for any updates on her upcoming meeting. She was a woman in control, dressed sharply in a navy blazer and tailored pants, carrying herself with quiet authority. Her calm demeanor hid the fact that she had just returned from a covert mission, one that would soon bring her face to face with a man who had no idea who he was about to cross paths with. As she adjusted the strap of her bag, she could feel eyes on her. She glanced to the side, noticing a police officer making his way through the crowd. Officer Brian Williams, in his mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered, wore a look of suspicion as his eyes scanned the people around him. He was a man who believed he had all the answers, someone who thought his badge and uniform were enough to silence anyone who dared question him. As he walked past Jasmine, his gaze lingered on her for a moment too long, and something about the way he looked at her made her skin crawl. Without warning, he stopped. "Hey, you," he called out, his voice gruff and commanding. Jasmine turned to face him, her expression neutral, though her heart raced slightly at the interruption. "Do you mind explaining what you're doing here?" The officer's tone was harsh, his gaze narrowing as if he already expected her to be guilty of something. Jasmine took a slow breath, maintaining her composure. "I'm just waiting for my flight," she replied calmly, though she could feel the eyes of the passengers around her shifting their attention. Officer Williams wasn't satisfied with the response. "Yeah? You sure you don't have something hidden in that bag?" he sneered, stepping closer. Jasmine stood her ground, unfazed by the officer's behavior. She knew how this went. People like him often thought they could push around those they deemed out of place. But today was different. Today, she wasn't just another woman in the crowd. As Officer Williams moved in closer, Jasmine's mind raced. She wasn't just a passenger on a flight. She was part of an ongoing investigation, one that had been tracking corrupt individuals in positions of power for months. And she had a very important role in bringing them to justice. Jasmine's calm exterior masked the seriousness of the situation. She could feel her pulse quicken, but she refused to show it. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said, her voice steady. "But I have a flight to catch, and I suggest you let me be on my way." Officer Williams smirked, clearly not impressed. "I think I'll be the judge of that," he muttered, stepping forward as if to make a move. But just as he reached for her bag, a shift in the atmosphere seemed to ripple through the terminal. Jasmine's hand subtly brushed against the hidden badge tucked inside her blazer, the badge that represented her true identity. It was a reminder of the authority she wielded, one that Officer Williams was about to realize far too late. As Officer Williams stepped closer, Jasmine's calm demeanor was unshaken, but her mind was alert. The air around them felt charged, like the stillness before a storm. The crowd that had been bustling about the terminal moments ago now seemed to fade into the background, their curious glances adding an extra layer of tension. Officer Williams stood in front of her, towering over her, clearly certain that he had the upper hand. His eyes scrutinized her, looking for any sign of fear or guilt, but Jasmine refused to give him that satisfaction. She knew what this was about. People like him saw a black woman in a professional setting, and in their mind, she didn't belong. Her presence in a place like this, so composed and unbothered, was more than he could handle. He took another step forward, his voice dropping low with a mixture of contempt and authority. "What's in the bag?" he demanded. Jasmine didn't flinch. She could feel the eyes of everyone around her, but it didn't matter. This moment, this confrontation, was about more than just a simple interaction between her and a police officer. It was about the system, about everything she had fought against for years. "It's just my personal items," she replied, her voice steady. "You can check if you'd like." Officer Williams didn't move, but the tension was palpable. "Why don't I just check it for you?" he said, reaching for her bag without waiting for a response. But Jasmine was prepared. She allowed him to get close, but as his hand touched the strap of her bag, she subtly shifted. In one smooth motion, she stepped back slightly, letting him see just enough of the badge hidden under her blazer. For a brief moment, the officer's expression faltered. It was a flash of hesitation, a split second where he realized he had misjudged the situation. He froze, staring at the badge, his face slowly turning from confident arrogance to confusion. "What is this?" he muttered, his hand still hovering near the bag. Jasmine didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the silence hang in the air, the weight of the moment growing with every passing second. Finally, she spoke, her voice cool and measured. "You're going to want to take a step back," she said. "I'm with the FBI, and I suggest you rethink your approach." The words hung in the air, a sharp contrast to the aggressive tone he had used moments before. The crowd, who had been watching the exchange, now seemed to hold their breath. Officer Williams looked from the badge to her face, his mind racing as the reality of the situation sank in. He had just tried to intimidate someone who was far beyond his reach. Jasmine didn't have to say anything else. The shock on his face said it all. He had miscalculated, and now there was no going back. As the officer stepped back, his confidence crumbling, Jasmine stood tall, her posture unwavering. She had been prepared for this moment, knowing that people like Officer Williams often assumed they could do whatever they wanted without consequence. But now, the power was in her hands. Without another word, she took out her phone, tapped a few buttons, and made the call. Within minutes, a team of federal agents would arrive to deal with the situation. Officer Williams, the one who thought he had the power, now found himself caught in a web of his own making. Jasmine watched him for a moment longer, her eyes locking with his, and then she turned her attention to the other passengers, who were still standing in stunned silence. The atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as an unjust confrontation had turned into something much bigger, an opportunity for justice to be served. And Jasmine wasn't about to let this moment slip by. As Jasmine finished making the call, the atmosphere in the terminal shifted even further. The once bustling crowd now seemed to shrink back, eyes darting between Jasmine and Officer Williams, who stood motionless, his hands still lingering in the air as though unsure what to do next. It was clear that the confident facade he had put on just moments ago had completely crumbled. For the first time, he was the one on the defensive. Jasmine watched him, her gaze steady, unwavering. She didn't need to say anything more. The power had shifted, and the realization of what had just happened was beginning to sink in for the officer. He had tried to bully someone who was far more than he could have ever imagined, and now he had to face the consequences of his own actions. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog, the noise of the terminal almost non-existent in comparison to the charged moment between the two of them. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Finally, the sound of footsteps approaching broke the stillness. Jasmine turned her head slightly as a team of federal agents appeared, their presence as undeniable as the gravity of the situation. They moved quickly and efficiently, recognizing Jasmine immediately, their expressions changing from neutrality to respect as they made their way toward her. "Agent Carter," one of them said, his voice calm but filled with a quiet authority. Jasmine didn't respond, but instead gestured toward Officer Williams, who was still standing there, his eyes now wide with disbelief. The agents wasted no time. One of them stepped forward and took hold of Officer Williams' arm, guiding him toward a more private area of the terminal. Jasmine's eyes followed the officers for a moment, watching the man who had just, moments before, tried to intimidate her, now being led away with nothing more than the slightest resistance. She could feel the eyes of the passengers around her again, though now there was a different kind of energy in the air. The crowd that had once been tense and uncomfortable now seemed to exhale, the collective tension lifting as the agents escorted the officer away. She had done what needed to be done, but the weight of what had happened still hung in the air, a reminder of how quickly things could shift when the truth was revealed. Jasmine turned away, heading toward the gate where her flight was waiting. As she walked, she couldn't help but think about the countless other situations like this, where people were treated unfairly, misjudged simply because of the color of their skin or their appearance. Today, she had been lucky, but she knew many others weren't. She knew this was just one small victory in a larger, ongoing battle for justice. As she boarded her plane, she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, but also a deep, quiet resolve. The work wasn't over, not by a long shot. The road ahead would be long and full of challenges, but today, for once, the system had worked in her favor. She had stood her ground, and the power had shifted. But there were still so many more stories to tell, so many more injustices to uncover. And Jasmine Carter, with her calm authority and unshakable determination, would continue to fight. She would keep uncovering the truth, no matter where it led. For her, the fight for justice wasn't just a career. It was a calling. And this was just the beginning. As the plane ascended into the sky, Jasmine leaned back in her seat, staring out of the window as the world below shrank away. The cloud cover blurred her view, but her thoughts were crystal clear. The events of the day replayed in her mind. Each moment, each step, each shift in power. The encounter at the terminal had been unexpected, but it had also been a reminder of why she did what she did. She wasn't just working for the FBI. She wasn't just part of a larger system. She was a force for change, and today, she had made a difference. But there was more to do. Jasmine's mind wandered to the files she had brought with her on the plane. They were hidden carefully in the seat pocket in front of her, files that contained vital information about a network of corruption that stretched far beyond a single police officer. Officer Williams was only a small part of a much larger system. Her job was far from over. As the plane leveled out, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and the flight attendants began their service. Jasmine ignored the small talk, her mind still processing everything that had happened. The unease that lingered from the confrontation was starting to fade, replaced by the focus that had always guided her. She was on a mission, and this was just one chapter in a much larger story. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. She looked at it, seeing a message from her superior. It was short, but its weight was clear. Prepare for the next phase. Jasmine's fingers hovered over the screen, but instead of responding immediately, she set the phone down. She had learned long ago that some things had to be handled with careful patience. She needed to know the full scope of the case, to understand every detail before taking the next step. Her role wasn't just about catching individuals. It was about unraveling an entire web of corruption. Officer Williams was a small fish in this sea, and his exposure was just the beginning. As the hours passed, Jasmine couldn't help but reflect on the people she had met along the way. Her career had taken her into the deepest corners of the justice system, and while she had seen the best of humanity, she had also seen the worst. The fight for justice wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always pretty, but she had made peace with that. Jasmine Carter had always been someone who worked behind the scenes, uncovering truths and exposing lies. She had learned to be patient, to wait for the right moment to act. And when that moment came, she knew how to take control. This was her calling. This was her life. As the flight began its descent, the familiar hum of the engines signaled that her next destination was near. Jasmine straightened up in her seat, gathering her belongings. The journey ahead would be long, filled with challenges and obstacles, but she was ready. She was always ready. The plane touched down, and as she walked through the terminal, her mind was already focused on the next steps. The files she carried with her weren't just papers. They were pieces of a puzzle, each one bringing her closer to the truth. And when the truth was finally revealed, nothing would ever be the same again. Jasmine Carter was ready to expose the system. She was ready to bring justice to those who thought they could hide in the shadows. And this was just the beginning. The following morning, Jasmine sat in a quiet cafe, her laptop open in front of her, carefully reviewing the file she had brought with her. The soft hum of the coffee shop was a far cry from the intensity of her work, But today was different. Today, she needed to make sure she had every detail right before proceeding. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her focus. She glanced at the screen, seeing another message from her superior. It's time. Prepare for Phase 2. Jasmine's heart rate quickened, but she remained composed. The quiet moments before a big move were always the hardest. She closed her laptop and gathered her things, slipping the files into her bag. This was no longer just about exposing one officer's wrongdoing. It was about bringing down an entire network of corruption that had been running under the surface for far too long. As she stepped out of the cafe, the cool morning air hit her face, refreshing but with a hint of urgency. She had a meeting in 30 minutes, one that would take her deeper into this case than she had ever been before. She was ready. She had to be. The car ride to the location was quick, but Jasmine's mind raced through all the pieces she had collected. She was piecing together the puzzle of a corrupt system, and with each new piece, the picture became clearer. She had to trust her instincts, and today her instincts told her that everything was falling into place. As the car pulled up to a nondescript office building in the heart of the city, Jasmine took a deep breath. She was about to enter a room where powerful people would finally have to answer for their actions. The building was unassuming from the outside, but Jasmine knew that behind those walls, the truth was waiting to be exposed. She walked. Inside, her pace steady and confident. The receptionist, a young woman who looked like she had been at her desk for far too long, barely glanced up as Jasmine walked past. The elevator ride was quiet, each floor passing in a blur. Jasmine's mind remained focused. She was just one step away from the breakthrough she had been waiting for. The door to the conference room opened, and she was greeted by two other agents, both of them standing up from their seats as she entered. Agent Carter, one of them said, his tone respectful but tinged with anticipation. Jasmine nodded and took a seat, setting down her bag and taking a deep breath. This was it. They began to go over the details, talking through the files and the intelligence they had gathered. The pieces were all there, but now they needed to connect the dots in a way that would leave no room for doubt. As the discussion unfolded, Jasmine's mind worked quickly, piecing together the clues. There was no room for mistakes. She had to get this right. The network of corruption was larger than she had imagined, and the people involved were more powerful than she had realized. But that only made her determination stronger. The system had to be dismantled, and she was going to be the one to do it. The meeting lasted for hours, each passing minute taking her deeper into the web of deceit and manipulation. By the time they finished, Jasmine had a clear plan in place. The next steps were critical, and she knew that once she moved forward, there would be no going back. But she was ready. She had to be. As she left the building, the weight of the task ahead settled on her shoulders. The road was long, and the obstacles would be many, but Jasmine knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down. She would bring justice to those who thought they were untouchable. The truth was coming, and there was nothing that could stop it. The fight for justice wasn't just her job. It was her life, and she was just getting started. Days passed, and Jasmine's focus remained unshaken as she worked tirelessly on the case. The information from the meeting had been crucial, but now it was time to act. The operation she had been preparing for was finally within reach, and she could feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. This was the moment that would change everything. As she sat at her desk late one evening, reviewing the last of the evidence, a message popped up on her screen. It was from one of her colleagues, Agent Lee, a trusted member of her team. The target's confirmed. We're set for tomorrow. Be ready. Jasmine's fingers hovered over her mouse for a moment before she typed a quick reply. Understood. Let's do this. The next day, the plan was set in motion. Jasmine arrived at the operations staging area early in the morning, the sun still low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. The building they had been monitoring was just ahead, an unassuming office complex, but one that housed the corrupt individuals they had been tracking for months. The atmosphere was tense, the kind of quiet before storm. Jasmine's team was already on site, each agent taking their position. She walked over to where Agent Lee was standing, his expression serious, as he went over the final details. "Everything's ready," he said, nodding toward the building. "We move in on your signal." Jasmine took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the target. This was it. She had waited for this moment, prepared for it, and now there was no turning back. She gave a subtle nod to Agent Lee, signaling that it was time. The agents moved swiftly, their steps coordinated and purposeful. Jasmine led the charge, her mind sharp and focused. The air seemed to hum with anticipation as they approached the building. Inside, the operation was unfolding precisely as planned. Every step, every move had been calculated to ensure that those responsible for the corruption would be held accountable. The agents moved in and secured the building, working quickly to neutralize any potential threats. Jasmine made her way through the corridors, each step bringing her closer to the heart of the operation. She could hear the soft murmur of voices ahead, but she didn't hesitate. She had a job to do. As she reached the office where the key figures were located, she paused for a moment, gathering her composure. This was the moment of truth. She stepped inside, her presence commanding immediate attention. The figures sitting at the conference table froze, their eyes widening as they recognized who had entered the room. They had no idea what was coming. Jasmine moved swiftly, her voice calm but firm. "You're under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, and several other charges. This operation is over." The room was silent for a moment before chaos erupted. The individuals who had thought they were untouchable were now powerless. Jasmine stood tall, watching as her team moved in to secure the suspects. The truth was out, and justice was finally being served. As the agents led the suspects away, Jasmine allowed herself a moment to breathe. It had been a long road, but they had made it. The corruption that had been running unchecked for so long was now exposed, and the system would have to reckon with it. Jasmine didn't smile, but there was a quiet satisfaction in her eyes. She had done what she set out to do. The work wasn't finished, but this was a victory. And victories, no matter how small, were steps in the right direction. As she left the building, the weight of the operation lifted from her shoulders. But she knew there was more to come. The system had been shaken, but it wasn't broken. Jasmine had a long road ahead, but she was ready for whatever came next. The days following the operation were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and follow-up investigations. Jasmine had barely slept, her mind still racing with the events of the past week. The bust had gone down smoothly, the key figures arrested, and the corruption network was in the process of being dismantled. Yet, despite the success, there was a gnawing feeling that something bigger was still lurking in the shadows. Jasmine sat in her office late one evening, reviewing new intelligence that had come in. The operation had only been a small piece of a much larger puzzle. She knew this was just the beginning. As she scanned the reports, one piece of information stood out to her, a name she hadn't expected to see. It was tied to a figure she had been investigating for months, someone who had eluded her team's efforts so far. This name was connected to high-ranking individuals, and it was clear that this person was not just a part of the corruption network, but a major player. Jasmine's pulse quickened as she realized the full scope of what they were dealing with. She had thought they had struck a blow to the system, but now it seemed that the real challenge was just beginning. The person they were after had connections, influence, and resources that could prove dangerous if they weren't careful. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. She had been down this road before, pushing through the obstacles, the long hours, the frustrations. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. She knew that the fight for justice was never easy, but she was determined to see it through. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Agent Lee. "We've got movement on the target. We need to act fast." Jasmine stood up, her decision already made. She wasn't about to let this person slip away. She gathered her things, her mind focused and sharp, ready for whatever came next. She was used to moving quickly, and today would be no different. As she arrived at the staging area, she could feel the tension in the air. The team was already assembling, getting ready for the next phase of the operation. Jasmine approached Agent Lee, who handed her a folder with the latest intel. "This is it," he said. "Everything lines up. We go in tomorrow." Jasmine nodded, taking in the details. The target was in the city, and they had a window of opportunity that was quickly closing. It was now or never. She could sense the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she didn't show it. She had been in tight situations before, and she knew how to stay calm under pressure. "Let's get it done," she said, her voice steady and confident. As the team prepared for the next day's operation, Jasmine took a moment to herself. She stood outside for a few minutes, the cool night air biting at her skin. The city was quiet, but she knew it was only the calm before the storm. Tomorrow, they would be taking down one of the most powerful individuals involved in the corruption network. The operation was critical, and failure was not an option. Jasmine didn't let herself dwell on the risks. She focused only on the mission ahead. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke through the horizon, Jasmine and her team were already on the move. The time had come. They were going after the heart of the network, and they were prepared to take down anyone who stood in their way. This was the moment that would define everything. Jasmine was ready to face it head-on. She knew that justice would prevail, and she would be the one to ensure it. The morning of the operation arrived, and the air in the staging area was thick with anticipation. Jasmine stood with her team, eyes fixed on the map spread out in front of them. The target building was in the heart of the city, a high-rise that seemed to tower over everything around it. The target they were after was more than just another corrupt figure. It was the linchpin in a web of deceit that stretched across various sectors of the government and law enforcement. They had gathered enough evidence to make this a decisive move. As Jasmine surveyed the details, she felt a familiar surge of determination. This was no longer about making a case. This was about bringing down a powerful figure who had eluded justice for far too long. The team was ready. They had planned every step, accounted for every potential risk. The operation was as close to flawless as they could make it, but there was no room for error. "We move in 10 minutes, Jasmine said, her voice steady but carrying a weight of finality. She turned to Agent Lee, who nodded in acknowledgement, his face a mask of concentration. The team split into smaller groups, each member taking their assigned position. Jasmine was in charge of the entry team, and she knew that her role would be crucial in ensuring the mission went smoothly. As they moved into position, Jasmine's mind replayed every bit of intelligence they had gathered. There was no room for doubt. This had to work. She had to make sure that when they took down the target, it would be done with precision and no chances for anyone to escape. The building loomed ahead, its windows gleaming in the morning light, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere surrounding it. Jasmine's heart beat steadily in her chest as she walked through the entrance with her team. The first few steps inside were quiet, but it wasn't long before the sound of footsteps and murmurs filled the air. They had taken the building by surprise. The plan was in motion. Jasmine's team moved swiftly, clearing rooms, securing the area, and communicating with one another through earpieces. There was no time to waste. Every minute counted. The operation unfolded without incident as they approached the floor where the target was believed to be located. The final door was ahead, and Jasmine's pulse quickened. This was it. She raised her hand, signaling the team to stop. They had reached the door. The target was on the other side. Jasmine could hear the faint sound of voices, the unmistakable tone of someone trying to make a quick exit. She motioned for Agent Lee to take position on the left side of the door. The rest of the team spread out, waiting for her signal. She took a deep breath, her mind running through the final steps of the plan. "On my mark," she said quietly, making sure everyone was in position. 3, 2, 1. Now! With a swift motion, the team breached the door. Jasmine was the first to enter, her eyes scanning the room. The target was sitting behind a large desk, surrounded by documents and electronic devices. He looked up in surprise as the agents flooded the room, and for a brief moment, Jasmine saw the flicker of realization in his eyes. He knew this was the end. "You're under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, and several other charges," Jasmine said calmly, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. The target opened his mouth to speak, but the words never came. He had no more moves left. Jasmine's team moved in to secure him, handcuffing him without hesitation. She stood there for a moment, watching as the weight of the situation sank in. The man who had been untouchable for so long was now facing justice, and Jasmine had been the one to ensure it happened. As the target was led away, she allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. This was what she had worked for, what she had fought for. Justice had been served, and for Jasmine Carter, it was just another step in the ongoing battle to expose corruption and fight for what was right. Weeks passed, and the dust settled from the operation. The building was secure, the arrest had been made, and the corrupt network was now exposed. Jasmine had done her part, but she knew that this victory, while significant, was just one chapter in a much larger story. She sat in her office, the silence of the room filling the space as she reviewed the latest reports. The faces and names of those she had brought to justice were now part of a much bigger puzzle, and her next steps were critical. Jasmine's phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Agent Lee. "We need to talk. You're going to want to hear this." She felt a twinge of unease, though she didn't show it. She knew Lee well enough to know that his messages were rarely casual. Grabbing her coat and heading out the door, Jasmine's mind raced through every possibility. What could they have missed? What was still lurking in the shadows? She arrived at the designated meeting spot, a quiet cafe in the city, where Lee was already waiting for her. His face was serious, and the moment she sat down, he slid a folder across the table toward her. "This is everything," he said, his tone low. Jasmine opened the folder, scanning the contents. Her eyes narrowed as she processed the information. It was a list of names, all connected to the initial operation, but there was one name at the bottom of the list that stood out, a name that hadn't appeared before. It was a high-ranking government official, someone whose position gave them the power to influence the course of the investigation. Jasmine's stomach tightened. She had suspected that there was more to this than just a few corrupt officers. But this was bigger than she had imagined. The official's name was linked to a series of suspicious financial transactions, all seemingly designed to cover up the corruption. And it didn't stop there. The name was tied to several unsolved cases, all of which pointed back to the very network they had been targeting. "What's the next step?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Lee sighed, leaning back in his chair. "We need to take them down, but this one is going to be tricky. We don't have enough evidence to move yet, but we know they're involved." Jasmine's eyes met his, determination hardening within her. "We'll find a way," she said. "We can't let this go." The stakes had just been raised, and Jasmine knew there was no turning back now. The next phase of the operation would require careful planning, strategy, and patience. It would be dangerous, but Jasmine was used to danger. She had fought for justice her entire career, and she wasn't about to stop now. As the conversation continued, Jasmine's mind was already working through the next steps. The information they had uncovered would change everything, and she had to be ready for the fallout. As she left the cafe, her thoughts were sharp, focused, and resolute. This was a fight for justice, and she was prepared to see it through to the end. There would be more challenges, more obstacles in her path. But Jasmine had learned long ago that no matter how difficult the road, justice always found its way. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning.